Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts, in the shadow of the Great Blue Hills. We are so delighted and so very honored that you'll join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Tell your kids, teachers, principals, and librarians. And please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Himalaya, Ghana, Podcast Addict, Good Pod, wherever you find your podcast. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by The Adventures of Patch, delightful series of adventure stories written by David Gibby. Overwhelmed by endless hours of screen time, craving a wholesome escape for your little ones? Introduce them to the enchanted world of The Adventures of Patch the Bear. Crafted with love and imagination, these tales serve as a passport to wonder-filled adventures far from the digital buzz. Let Patch light up your child's world, allowing them to explore, dream, and imagine beyond boundaries. This is a really fun series that you and your kids will absolutely adore. The Adventures of Patch, written by David Gibby. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Facing the Beast Within, written by New York Times best-selling author Mark Cheverton. Cameron Poole has a problem, a big problem. He's a bully magnet who struggles with anxiety. Being the smallest sixth grader at his summer camp, everything around him triggers his anxiety, his beast, making it impossible for him to do the same things other kids can do. In a constant state of worry, Cameron feels like a perpetual failure. That's bad enough. But when Cameron learns that mythical monsters are trying to invade his camp, things go from bad to worse. You and your kids are going to love this exciting middle grade novel. It belongs in your family library. You're going to love it. Facing the Beast Within, written by Mark Cheverton. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by the books by Robert Provan, Sammy and Scarlett's Mangrove Adventure, and Sammy and Scarlett's Coral Reef Adventure. The first book in the series, Mangrove Adventure, recounts the tale of two young fish who live in a tidal pool in the Florida Keys. Sammy is a sergeant major fish, and Scarlett is a yellow-tailed snapper. They are different species from one another, and they don't look anything alike. But despite this, they become best of friends. They learn that it's not the color of the fish's scales that matters, but rather whether or not they have a loving heart. Sammy and Scarlett's Coral Reef Adventure is the second book in the series and tells the story of Sammy and Scarlett's continuing journey from the shelter of the mangrove forest in search of their adult home on the coral reef. The two fish are befriended along the way by Howie, the hawk-billed sea turtle, who helps them through the dangers they will face ahead. Together, the three explore the amazing underwater city that is a coral reef. You and your family are going to love these books. Check them out today. The books by Robert Provan. Join us right now from the beautiful city of Chicago in Illinois. Our guest is here today to celebrate. His new picture book is called How You Become You. Please welcome to the show, O'Brien McMahon. Hey, O'Brien, how are you?
I'm doing well, Jed. Thanks for having me on.
Delighted to have you on. So how am I going to become me?
Well, quick backstory to the book is that, with two young boys myself, I found myself becoming a little bit of a children's book critic and would quickly judge which books I enjoyed and which books I didn't. And the ones that I enjoyed were the ones that we wound up reading more and more often. And I was reading Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You'll Go to my then 1-year-old and just thinking to myself, man, I'm getting way more out of this than he is. And then I read the cover jacket and realized that he had written that as a college commencement speech, not a children's book, and then had turned it into a children's book as his last book. And I thought, oh, this was written for me. And it had me thinking, why aren't there more of these types of books out there that are written specifically to the parents, since we're often reading them to kids that don't really understand anyway and just, like to hear the repetition and the words and the rhyming pattern and the pictures and all of that. And so I thought, well, if I could create something that was whimsical and fun for kids, but also really resonated with adults, that would be a win. And for the last 5 years through my day job, I've been a part of a leadership development group. And the coach that I work with there has a framework for building a strong sense of self. And so with his permission and a lot of encouragement on his part, to his credit, I wrote a long form poem called How You Become You to lay out some of the basic steps to just figuring yourself out and finding what you love and what you believe about the world. And found a great illustrator in Stella Maris, who had a very fantastical style and could kind of bring the imagery together that kids would enjoy. And a couple years later, we have a book.
That's really wonderful. I agree with you that there is a lot of wisdom in kids' books, particularly picture books, that oftentimes goes unnoticed by parents because we're so busy and we just, we know it's important to read with our kids, but sometimes our hearts aren't in it or our minds aren't in it, and we're just kind of reading the words and not allowing the words to move us. And I think it's really important to be open and to be, we talk about being present for our kids. I think it's also important for us to be present anytime we're consuming media, whether it's a movie or music or TV or especially kids' books, to just kind of be aware of what it is that we're consuming, so we can talk about it with our kids, and also be open to any message that might be there for us in addition to our kids.
Yeah, I know. I love that. And I think that's the power of art, is it's the ability to entertain and sort of cut through that filter. And, if that's all it is entertainment, that's fine, because there's value to that. But there is that ability to then think about what you're seeing and either put yourself in another person's shoes or think about the world from a different perspective, or hopefully in the case of this book, just get some reminders on what it really means to go out and be thoughtful about how you're living your life.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that I can sit down with How You Can Become You, and I won't have to hire a consultant or a life coach to kind of get that stuff together for me.
Well, you at least get a little bit of the way there. The main steps in the book are try as much as you can, and then try some more. Take a second and think about what it is that you love, and then take a second and think about what it is that you believe based on the experiences that you've had. And then find ways to put all that together and challenge yourself to try more of the things that you enjoy and go after those things in a more meaningful way, and then try to live in alignment with your belief system. And then the more you kind of cycle through that, trying new things, pushing yourself, and then reflecting on the things you love and believe, and then using that to influence new behavior, you'll find that not only do you enjoy it more, but it also becomes more meaningful, the things that you do. And over the last 5 years, I've used that in my own life, and it has been pretty rewarding.
What do you think is holding back most folks from, as you say, trying as much as you can?
Fear, I think, is one, in that new things are uncomfortable. And then I think there's just the general sense that, like, oh, I'm not somebody who does blank. We kind of all have that. And I've just had, I don't know if it's been innate or just the product of some good fortune that I've had, where I've done some things purely because I thought they would be fun and great experiences, and they wound up being really enriching parts of my life. And it kind of has encouraged me that, oh, maybe I could do more of that. A good example being the book, right? I don't have any background in writing children's books. I have a lot of background in writing and communicating, but I just thought, it would be really meaningful for me to be able to share something with my two boys that really means something to me, and for them to have that in their hands. And I went out and I did it, and I didn't know how to do it, but I wrote, and that was the easy part. And then once I had it, I just thought, okay, well, what's the next step? And I guess I got to figure out how publishing works. And then what's the next step? I guess I got to figure out how illustrations work. And then what's the next step? And you just keep taking steps. But I think a lot of us shy away from that because we just think, oh, that's a lot of work, or I'm not that type of person. And I think the more we can all just find things that we think would be fun and go after those things, we'd all be having a lot more fun with our time here on the planet.
I agree. I agree on both counts. I think that it is fear that is holding a lot of us back from going after those things that maybe we dream about for our entire lifetime. But it's like, I'm not that kind of guy. I'm not, I've been raised to do X, Y, and Z, and all my friends are over here, and that's like a different world, and they won't like me over there.
Yeah. The two questions I like asking myself, and I've kind of honed in on these lately through my own life and then helping some friends, is if there's something I'm thinking about, the first question is, am I ever going to do this? And if the answer is no, then that's fine. But if the answer is, yeah, I really would like to do this at some point, the next question is, well, if not now, when? Mm-hmm. And I think we push things off a lot. Oh, well, that'll happen in the future. But the reality is, unless you have a plan to make it happen and actually decide at some point that you're going to start, it never does happen. And so I like that if not now, when question, just to motivate myself to say, you know what? Yeah, that is a good point. I do need to get started on that. Or, you know what? Hey, I am a little overwhelmed right now, so I can't do this. It wouldn't be smart. But you know what? As soon as I get through this, then I'm going to get to that.
Okay. And I think that's great advice for an adult at any age. But how does that translate to our
to the kids?
5-year-olds?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's more for the adults. But I think one of the things that I did was in creating my author website, so listeners can go to o'brienmcmahon.com/books. And if you scroll down on there are exercises or conversations that you can have with your kids around these frameworks. So the first one is just to try. So create a list of anything that your kids want to try or anything you want to try, and bring your kids along with you. And then go out and try that stuff. It could be little stuff around the house. It could be big stuff. It could be planning your next trip, but making that a collaborative process to figure out the things that you want to try. And then once you've tried those things, taking a moment to reflect. I think the reflection phase of any experience is one we often skip over. We do it. We go, well, that was great. But to be able to slow down and slow our kids down after the fact and say, hey, what did you think of that? What did you learn? What did you love? What do you believe? What do you want to do more of next time if we do that again? Some of those reflection questions can be really powerful, and they can lock in that experience that we have for ourselves and help our children really lock in the lessons that they've learned, or even just the joy that they had or whatever. So I really think my hope with this is that as people read it, they're actually having these conversations with their kids to be able to co-create life together as a family. And it can be really hard. I actually had a friend of mine's little brother texted me last night after reading the book, and one of his takeaways was it's so easy as an adult to just get in our own path and be doing the things we want to do and pull our kids along. But he took it as a great reminder, which meant a lot to me, to go back and slow down and allow our kids to co-create this stuff with us.
Yeah. There's so much there that I love. I want to take a minute just to talk about making lists, because I think that's a phenomenal tool that a parent can use. I think a lot of people think, that's old fashioned. We don't need lists. We got all these computer gizmos, things that flash, but like sitting down making a list of stuff, that's like old and boring. But man, it is so helpful.
Oh yeah,
I know.
I agree.
With my kids, like, I don't know what to do. Well, let's make a list of the pros and the cons and sit down. And it's like suddenly the kids are like making the decisions on their own. It's like, oh. Yeah, this makes perfect sense. And I love the idea of how, giving our kids the ability to kind of lead the family in a certain direction. Where do we want to go on vacation? What do we want to do with this time? What do we want to do this weekend? I think that's I think it makes a lot of sense because it gets our kids invested. Now we don't have to drag our kids somewhere. But I also think it's empowering, to say to your kids, okay, this is your weekend. You're going to decide what we're going to do. You're going to help us decide what we're going to do this weekend. I think that can be incredibly empowering for a kid. And can really make a difference in their life as they grow.
Absolutely. I fully agree. And I think it's scalable as kids get older too. Mine are 5 and 2.5. And so, I'm not going to let my 2.5-year-old plan the whole weekend, but he is starting to be able to express himself and the things that he loves and sharing things that he enjoyed during that day. And, putting a plan together for maybe one activity that he wants to do the next day. So, and then the 5-year-old, he is capable of putting a larger idea together. Maybe he needs a little bit of boundaries or something, but my excitement with this is just being able to use it with them now and scale that up as they get older, to your point.
Yeah. As they're making lists and making suggestions of different things to do you sit down and talk with the kids about, okay, you want to do X, we have to do these things to be able to make X happen?
Yes. I mean, I think that's another constructive point about having these conversations is it's not just, oh, I get to play with this toy or, oh, we show up and do this thing, but what goes into having an experience and having them be a part of the family in a more meaningful way. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that you were, that you started the conversation by saying, you were kind of editing the list of books that you're going to be reading with your kids. I think there are a lot of parents out there who are wondering, how do you do that? Because my kids always are picking the books that I hate to read. I know my kids. I have a speech impediment. It was very bad when I was a kid. It's not so bad now, but there are certain letters that are really bad. F and S I have a hard time with when I'm tired. And especially when there's a lot of them in a row. And so my kids, I think they were evil, and they loved having me read Fox and Socks. And I would come home and I would read, and I'd sit there and I would just stutter the whole time. And I think they didn't giggle out loud, but I think they were giggling under their breath.
Yes, Fox and Socks is a tough one in a lot of households.
Yeah.
I like the challenge of Fox and Socks and try to read through it as fast as I can. And my kids have slowed me down now that I have most of it memorized, but my wife won't pull it out and read it. She did it just turns her brain into knots. I think I'm not going to say that I never read a book that my kids like that I don't like, but I try to steer them to ones that are fun and or have some lesson involved. In an authentic way. I'm not being militant and sitting down and saying, no, you can't read that. We're going to read this. If I say, hey, what about one of these books? And they go, no, I want this one. You sure? Yeah. Okay. Then we'll read that one. Cause back to the co-creation, like at some point, what you want is them to enjoy reading, not to be reading only the things that you want them to read. And I think that's true as they get older too. I think encouraging any kind of reading is good, whether it's comic books or fantasy or, if they get into history, whatever it is, I think reading is great. So I think it's just trying to, as much as you can, nudge them in the right direction And if there's one or two that you have to draw a hard line on, that's probably fine. They can just disappear from the collection.
Other than how you become you, do your kids and you have a couple of favorites you can share with us?
Yes. So let me think about what some of their favorites are. One of my favorites, which I had never heard of before it was gifted to me, was the book Roxaboxen. A friend had sent it to me, and it's a great story about the author's grandmother who grew up in Arizona, and there was a hill across the street that they used to play on, and they would turn it into this magical world. And it was basically just trash and rocks. It was boxes and rocks. That's why it was Roxaboxen. But they would have all these epic adventures over there. And it's just a great story about how real kids use their imaginations. And I get to the end, like last page, I tear up and like have to read it quickly so I don't completely choke up. So it's great. And the kids do enjoy that one. Fox and Socks, Hop on Pop, I mean, all the Dr. Seuss's are big. Curious George is big, all the classics in our house. It's funny how those books that still, like we were reading growing up and loved, they're still loved today. Kids are the same, even if the technology's changed.
Yeah, I think that's an important point that I think people are missing. I think this author is so amazing. His book is lasting generations. And that's true. There are certain authors that are timeless. But I think we forget about the fact that, just because our kids know how to turn on our laptop and get cartoons and stuff like that, that doesn't mean that they're changing and that they're really deep down different than us. We're human beings.
Yeah. So, I mean, they still like to have fun and books resonate. And I think if you can do a lot of reading with kids and if they can see you reading on your own, that builds that innate interest.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. LeVar Burton was here on the podcast and I asked him what inspired his passion for reading, and he said seeing his mom reading all the time, whether it was a magazine or the newspaper or a novel, reading to him. I think the same is true when we're talking about how we live our lives. And, we started our conversation by encouraging kids to try as much as you can, to try new things, to challenge yourself, to go out there, to think about what it is that you really want, and then to go out and find the courage to do that. It's great to teach our kids that and help our kids learn that. But I think the lesson is going to be that much more meaningful when our kids get to see us do that in our own lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's just tried and true, like classic lead by example, right? Mm-hmm. I try to think about that with my kids as well. And there's a lot of talk around kids using technology, but there's not a lot of talk around parents using technology. And it's a work in progress for me. I could be as addicted to my phone as anybody, but I am working through that with my wife right now. We are supporting each other through that journey because I do think it's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, I know from your website that you do a little consulting. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that in case somebody is interested?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Talk about trying as much as you can, right? And so I really like Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. And one of the lessons that I took from that book is you can't really know yourself until you do a lot of things and then are able to look back and see what the through line is for all of those. And so I wrote this book, and in putting this website together, took a look back on all the different things that I do and was able to kind of pull the threads together with the website. So if you just go to o'brienmcmahon.com, you can see all the things I do on there. But I really like understanding people and then using that understanding to achieve things for myself and to help others achieve things. And so at work, I'm a total rewards consultant. So we consult with companies on how to pay and reward their people, whether that's through compensation, through their health plans, their medical benefits, or through their retirement plans. I also host a podcast called People Business, where I interview experts on the people side of work and what it means to be a better leader, more skilled, more interpersonal or better interpersonal skills, and then, personal development, because you can't lead others farther than you've led yourself. And then, trying to write and share stories that resonate with adults and kids. So that's kind of the through line with all the different things that I do.
And is there a next children's book in the works that you can kind of give us a sneak preview of?
There is another one written, and I'm going to see how this one does before putting the plans in place for that one. But the next one would be around, once you kind of know who you are, how do you let that out?
Awesome. We should tell people where they can go and remind them of your website and so they can learn all about how you become you.
Yeah. So again, it's just o'brienmcmahon.com. Like the two last names are spelled OBRIENMCMAHON.com.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of How You Become You. Great new picture book from our guest, O'Brien McMahon. Hey, O'Brien, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me on.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast and will join us for the next exciting, informative, and entertaining episode of the show. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we'll start by thanking our amazing guest. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Kyoko Ito, Nick Warner, Sydney Swan, Kayla Newland, Kristen Barrett, Hannah Rose. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.